In just 32 seconds, one of Britain's most beloved comedians went from cracking jokes to absolutely destroying a television host's ego on live television, triggering a meltdown so intense that security had to get involved. What started as witty banter transformed into the most explosive showdown the studio had ever witnessed, ending with Ricky Gervais being physically escorted from the building while Piers Morgan sat red-faced and speechless. The atmosphere in the studio last night was electric. From the moment Ricky Gervais walked onto the set, the comedian, known for his brutal honesty and razor-sharp wit, settled into the guest chair with that familiar smirk playing across his face. Piers Morgan, sitting across from him with his trademark confident posture, welcomed Ricky with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. "Ricky Gervais, welcome back to the show," Piers said, leaning forward with his hands clasped. "Always a pleasure to have someone who speaks their mind." Ricky tilted his head slightly, that mischievous glint already visible in his eyes. "Well, that's one way of putting it, Piers. I'd say I'm here because you need the ratings boost." The audience laughed nervously. It was typical Gervais humor, but there was an edge to his tone that suggested this wasn't going to be the friendly chat Piers had anticipated. The host forced a smile, clearly trying to maintain control of the situation from the outset. "Right, straight into it then," Piers said, shuffling his papers. "Let's talk about your recent comments on social media. You've been quite vocal about certain political issues, haven't you?" Ricky leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. "I've been vocal about stupidity, Piers. If that happens to overlap with politics, well, that's not my fault, is it?" The temperature in the room was already rising. Piers shifted in his seat, his smile becoming tighter. "You see, this is what I find interesting about you, Ricky. You dish it out constantly, mock everyone, tear people down with your comedy, but the moment someone challenges you, you hide behind the 'it's just jokes' defense." Ricky's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "That's rich coming from you, mate. You've built your entire career on being controversial and then playing the victim when people call you out on your nonsense." The audience went quiet. This wasn't playful anymore. Piers straightened up in his chair, his jaw tightening. "My nonsense. I speak truth to power. I ask the questions that need to be asked." "No, you don't," Ricky interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "You bully people who can't defend themselves and then hide behind free speech when you get criticized. There's a difference between asking tough questions and just being a complete arse for attention." Piers' face was beginning to flush red. "I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by someone who makes millions mocking religion and people's beliefs. Talk about punching down." "Punching down?" Ricky let out a short laugh. "Piers, religion isn't a person. Ideas aren't people. I mock ideas, not individuals. You, on the other hand, have spent years attacking real people, real human beings going through actual struggles, just to get headlines." The host's voice rose slightly. "That is absolutely not true. I defend traditional values. I stand up for what's right." "What's right?" Ricky leaned forward now, his casual demeanor sharpening. "You mean like when you defended hacking into people's phones? Or when you mocked mental health struggles on this very show? That's what you call standing up for what's right?" The studio had gone completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed frozen. Piers' face was now fully red, and he was gripping his note cards so tightly they were starting to crumple. "How dare you bring up ancient history?" Piers said, his voice shaking slightly with anger. "That was never proven, and you know it." "Neither was Santa Claus," Ricky shot back. "But we all know the truth, don't we?" A few people in the audience gasped. Others tried to suppress laughter. Piers slammed his hand on the desk, the sound echoing through the studio. "You know what your problem is, Ricky?" Piers said, pointing his finger across the desk. "You think you're untouchable. You think because you're funny, you can say whatever you want without consequences." Ricky's expression hardened. "No, Piers. My problem is that I'm sitting across from a man who's spent decades being cruel to people and then wondering why everyone thinks he's a bully. You want to talk about consequences? How about the consequences of your actions? The people you've hurt? The lives you've damaged with your manufactured outrage?" Piers stood up from his chair, towering over the desk. "This is my show. You don't come on here and insult me like this." Ricky remained seated, completely unfazed. "Then maybe don't invite people on if you can't handle honest conversation. You wanted someone who speaks their mind, remember? Or did you just want someone to kiss your arse for an hour? The tension had reached a breaking point. Piers was now pacing behind his desk, his face a deep shade of crimson. I have interviewed presidents, prime ministers, the biggest names in the world, and none of them have shown me this level of disrespect. Maybe they should have, Ricky said quietly. Maybe if more people told you the truth, you wouldn't be such an insufferable prick. The audience audibly gasped. Piers stopped pacing and stared at Ricky with pure fury in his eyes. What did you just call me? You heard me, Ricky replied, standing up now to meet Piers eye to eye. An insufferable prick. You parade around like you're some champion of free speech, but you can't even handle a comedian telling you the truth about yourself. Piers's voice was now a shout. Get off my show. Get the hell off my show right now. Gladly, Ricky said, spreading his arms wide. But before I go, let me make something crystal clear. The reason people don't respect you isn't because you're controversial. It's because you're a hypocrite. You demand everyone else take accountability while you take none yourself. The host was practically vibrating with rage. He grabbed his microphone from the desk and pointed it at Ricky like a weapon. You self-righteous, arrogant piece of... There it is, Ricky interrupted, a grim smile on his face. There's the real Piers Morgan, not the professional broadcaster. Just an angry man who can't handle being challenged. Piers turned to someone off camera, presumably a producer. Get him out of here! I want him removed from the building! Ricky started walking toward the exit, but he stopped and turned back to face Piers one more time. You know what's funny? You invited me here thinking I'd play nice, maybe give you some good sound bites for your social media. But you forgot something important. What's that? Piers spat, his voice dripping with venom. I don't need you, Ricky said simply. You need me. You need guests like me, because without us, you're just a man shouting at an empty chair, and everyone watching knows it. The words hung in the air like smoke. Piers looked like he was about to explode. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Finally, he found his voice. You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you've won something here tonight? Ricky shrugged. I'm not trying to win anything, Piers. I'm just tired of watching you bully people and pretend it's journalism. Someone had to say it. I am a journalist, Piers roared. I've won awards. I've broken major stories. And you've also invaded people's privacy, spread misinformation, and attacked vulnerable people for entertainment, Ricky countered. Those things don't cancel each other out. By now, security personnel had entered the studio. They approached Ricky cautiously, unsure of how to proceed. The comedian looked at them and held up his hands. Don't worry, lads. I'm leaving. No need for the heavy stuff. But Piers wasn't done. You're a coward, Gervais. You hide behind your comedy and your atheism and your supposedly progressive views, but you're just as mean-spirited as anyone else. Ricky stopped walking again. The security guard stopped too, sensing this wasn't quite over. The comedian turned slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, but somehow more powerful. You want to know the difference between you and me, Piers? When I make fun of someone, it's because they hold power. Politicians, celebrities, people with platforms and influence. You go after people who are already struggling, people who are dealing with mental health issues, people who are different from you, people who can't fight back. That's not brave. That's not journalism. That's just cruel. Piers slammed both hands on his desk now. That is absolute rubbish. I have never attacked anyone who didn't deserve it. Really? Ricky's voice was ice cold now. What about the time you mocked that young woman for speaking about her anxiety? What about when you laughed at people for caring about climate change? What about every single time someone vulnerable came on your show and you treated them like a joke? The host's face was now purple with rage. Those people were pushing dangerous agendas. They needed to be challenged. No, Piers, Ricky said, shaking his head. They needed to be heard. There's a difference between challenging someone's ideas and humiliating them as a person. You've spent so long doing the latter that you've forgotten there even is a difference. The security guards were now gently trying to guide Ricky toward the exit, but he kept talking as he moved. And you know what the saddest part is? You could have been good at this. You could have used your platform to actually make a difference, to have meaningful conversations, to bridge divides. But instead, you chose to be a provocateur. You chose rage over reason. Every single time. Piers was following them now, walking around his desk and moving toward Ricky. You don't get to come into my house and tell me how to do my job. Your house? Ricky stopped one more time, despite the security guard's gentle insistence. Piers, this isn't your house. This is a television studio owned by a network that could replace you tomorrow and nobody would care. You're not irreplaceable. You're just loud. That seemed to hit harder than anything else Ricky had said all night. Piers's face contorted with a mixture of anger and something that looked almost like hurt. Get out, he said, his voice suddenly much quieter. Just get out. I'm trying to, Ricky replied. You're the one who keeps the conversation going. The security team finally managed to guide Ricky toward the studio exit. As they walked, the comedian called back over his shoulder one last time. For what it's worth, Piers, I don't hate you. I just think you've wasted your talent on being angry instead of being insightful. That's the real tragedy here. Piers stood in the middle of the studio floor, chest heaving, fists clenched at his sides. Don't you dare pity me. I don't need your pity. It's not pity, Ricky said from the doorway. It's disappointment. There's a difference. And with that, the comedian disappeared through the exit, flanked by security. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure if they were allowed to react. Some looked shocked. Others looked uncomfortable. A few were trying not to smile. Piers stood alone in the middle of his set, the cameras still rolling, capturing every moment of his humiliation. His carefully constructed image of the tough-talking, no-nonsense interviewer had completely crumbled in the span of one conversation. The host slowly walked back to his desk and sat down heavily in his chair. He stared at the camera, his jaw working as he tried to compose himself. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. Well, he said, attempting to regain some semblance of control, I think that showed everyone exactly what Ricky Gervais is really like. A guest who comes onto someone's show and then behaves like that. It's disgraceful. But even as he said the words, everyone watching could see they rang hollow. The damage was done. The Emperor had no clothes, and everyone had just watched it happen in real time. Behind the scenes, according to witnesses, Ricky was escorted to collect his belongings. He remained calm and polite with the security staff, even cracking a few jokes to lighten the mood. One guard reportedly told him it was the most exciting thing that had happened on the show in years. Back in the studio, Piers was attempting to continue with the program, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. He stumbled through his closing remarks, his usual confidence completely absent. Several times he seemed to lose his train of thought, his eyes glazing over as he presumably replayed the confrontation in his mind. The producers were in a state of panic. Phone calls were being made, emergency meetings were being scheduled, and social media was already exploding with clips of the argument. Within minutes, the confrontation was trending worldwide, with people taking sides and dissecting every word that had been exchanged. As Ricky left the building and climbed into his waiting car, he was asked by a member of staff if he regretted anything he'd said. He smiled that familiar smile and shook his head. Not a word, he replied. Sometimes the truth needs to be said, even if it's uncomfortable, especially if it's uncomfortable. The car pulled away from the studio, leaving behind a scene of chaos. Inside, Piers Morgan sat at his desk, the weight of what had just happened settling on his shoulders. For once in his life, the man who always had the last word had been left speechless. The show cut to commercial break early, the producers scrambling to figure out how to salvage what was left of the program. But the damage was irreversible. In 32 seconds of initial confrontation that escalated into minutes of brutal honesty, Ricky Gervais had done what many had tried and failed to do. He had held up a mirror to Piers Morgan and forced him to look at his own reflection. The audience filed out of the studio in near silence, whispering to each other about what they had just witnessed. Many pulled out their phones, already composing messages to friends and family about the extraordinary scenes they had just observed firsthand. By the time the show ended its broadcast, the clip had been viewed millions of times. Viewers around the world were watching the confrontation unfold, sharing their reactions, and debating who was in the right. But one thing was clear to almost everyone. This was not a carefully orchestrated bit of television drama. This was real, raw, and completely unfiltered. Piers Morgan had built his career on being the aggressor, the provocateur, the man who asked the tough questions and didn't back down. But last night, he met someone who not only refused to be intimidated, but turned the tables completely. And in doing so, Ricky Gervais had exposed something that many had long suspected but few had been able to articulate so clearly, that beneath all the bluster and bravado, Piers Morgan was just a bully who couldn't handle being challenged. The fallout from this confrontation would echo through the television industry for days to come. Questions would be asked about the nature of confrontational interviewing, about the responsibility of broadcasters, and about where the line should be drawn between provocative journalism and pure antagonism. But in that moment, as Ricky Gervais's car disappeared into the night and Piers Morgan sat alone at his desk, one thing was abundantly clear. Television had just witnessed one of its most explosive confrontations, and nothing would quite be the same again. The man who had made a career out of making others uncomfortable had finally experienced what it felt like to be on the receiving end, and the entire world had watched it happen in real time.